Emily Hart had always loved the quiet, but lately, the silence in her home had grown too heavy. Her husband, Daniel, worked long hours at his accounting firm, and even when he was home, his attention was buried in spreadsheets and late-night phone calls. They barely spoke anymore, except about bills or grocery lists. The warmth they once shared had faded into polite distance. After one particularly cold dinner, Emily decided she needed to get away just for a while. She found an ad for a cabin in northern Vermont, isolated, surrounded by forest and perfect for a weekend of solitude. It was meant to be a break, a way to clear her thoughts. Daniel didn't argue. He simply nodded and said, "You probably need it." His detached tone made her heart ache, but she didn't show it. The next morning, she packed her bag, left a note on the counter, and drove north. The drive was long and winding. The trees grew taller the deeper she went into the woods, their branches creating shadows that danced across the road. When she finally reached the cabin, the sun was setting, painting the sky orange and pink. The cabin stood small but sturdy, its wooden frame aged and moss-covered, with smoke marks around the chimney from old fires. Emily stepped out of her car and took a deep breath. The air was cold, crisp, and clean. For the first time in months, she felt like she could breathe again, inside. The cabin was simple, one main room with a stone fireplace, a small kitchen, and a single bed tucked near a window. There was no TV, no Wi-Fi, just silence. She lit the fireplace, made a cup of tea, and sat down on the couch, feeling the warmth spread across her face. She looked around, noticing how the shadows shifted with the firelight, and felt a strange mixture of peace and unease as night fell. She unpacked and tried to read a book, but her thoughts kept drifting. She missed Daniel even though he'd made her feel invisible for months. She wondered if he missed her too, or if he was buried in work. Not even noticing the empty bed beside him, a sudden sound pulled her from her thoughts, a soft knock at the door. Emily froze. It was almost 9 p.m., and she hadn't seen another soul since she arrived. She hesitated before walking to the door, her hand trembling slightly as she unlocked it. A man stood outside, tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a dark jacket and a beanie. His face was rugged, with kind eyes that seemed to study her carefully. "Sorry to bother you," he said quickly, raising his hands as if to show he meant no harm. "I'm Jack. I live in the next cabin down the trail. Just wanted to make sure you got here all right. We don't get many visitors up here." Emily let out a small breath. "Oh, thank you. Yes, I'm fine. Just settling in." Jack smiled, his eyes warm but curious. "Good. These woods can be strange at night. If you need anything, help with firewood, directions, I'm around." She thanked him politely, and he nodded before disappearing into the dark. She locked the door behind him, but found herself glancing out the window once more. His cabin light flickered faintly through the trees, a reminder that she wasn't completely alone. Later, when she finally went to bed, the silence of the forest pressed in. The branches outside scraped against the glass, and the fire crackled softly. She drifted in and out of sleep until a sound woke her taut footsteps. They were faint, crunching through the snow outside. She held her breath, listening. They stopped near the window. Slowly she turned her head, her eyes landing on the thin curtain that swayed slightly, as though touched by the wind or someone's hand. Her heart thumped. She wanted to look, but fear pinned her to the bed. After a few moments, the sound faded. She stayed still until the early morning light filtered through the window. When she stepped outside at dawn, she saw them footprints in the snow. Big, heavy ones, circling near her window before disappearing into the trees. Her first thought was Jack. Maybe he came to check on her. But why wouldn't he knock? She tried to brush it off, convincing herself it must have been an animal. Still, something inside her felt unsettled. Later that day, while gathering wood behind the cabin, she heard a voice. "You shouldn't be doing that alone." She turned sharply. It was Jack again, smiling, an axe resting on his shoulder. He offered to help, and though she hesitated, she agreed. They talked while he chopped wood, simple things at first. He told her about living alone in the woods after his divorce, How he'd once been an architect in the city but left everything behind to find peace. His voice was calm, his laugh easy. There was something grounded about him, a quiet sadness that made him seem familiar. As the sky turned golden, they stood by the pile of logs, their breath visible in the cool air. "You seem like someone who came here to escape something," Jack said, his tone soft but certain. Emily hesitated, then smiled faintly. "Maybe, or someone who came here to remember who she used to be?" He nodded knowingly. Sometimes running away is the only way to hear yourself again. That night, Emily couldn't stop thinking about him. His words replayed in her head, his voice calm and patient. Felt like an echo of something she'd been missing for a long time. Around midnight, she sat by the fire, trying to read again. When she heard it, that same faint sound outside. Footsteps, her pulse quickened. Slowly, she turned her head toward the window. The curtains fluttered. And for a split second, she saw movement, a shadow, tall and unmistakably human. She stood up, her heart racing, and grabbed the flashlight from the table. When she shined it toward the window, nothing was there. She tried to convince herself it was just her imagination again, but the uneasy feeling clung to her. She checked the door, locked it, and sat on the couch until exhaustion pulled her into sleep. In the morning when she stepped outside, the air felt colder. The footprints were back, this time leading from the trees directly to her front steps. She swallowed hard and looked toward the woods. Jack appeared again, walking toward her from the trail, holding a cup of coffee. "Morning," he said cheerfully. "Rough night." She studied him, wondering if he knew something. "Did you come by last night?" she asked cautiously. He paused, then smiled slightly. "No. Why?" "Nothing," she said quickly. "Just strange noises." He nodded, sipping his coffee. "This place can play tricks on you. The quiet does that." Then before leaving, he added, "Make sure to lock your doors. Some things in the woods like to wander close." His words lingered all day. That evening, as the light faded and the forest grew darker, she couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. She lit the fire again, sat by the window, and tried to distract herself. But as she grew sleepy, she heard something, a whisper. It was faint but clear, like a breath against her ear. "You're not alone." She froze. The fire crackled. Her heart pounded. Slowly she turned, scanning the room. Empty. The whisper came again, almost softer this time. "Emily." Her breath caught. She stood, trembling, her eyes darting to the shadows in the corners. "Who's there?" She whispered back, but there was no answer. The room seemed to grow colder. She felt it, that heavy, invisible presence pressing around her. And though she couldn't see anyone, she could feel eyes on her, steady and near. Emily ran to the window and looked out. The forest was dark, except for one faint glow, a lantern flickering near the trees. And in that dim light, she saw him, Jack, standing still, watching her cabin. He didn't move. He didn't wave. He just stood there, as if guarding something unseen. Then, before she could call out, the lantern light went out. The woods went black. Emily stepped back from the window, her pulse hammering. She whispered to herself, trying to calm down. "You're just tired. Just tired." But as she turned toward her bed, she could still feel it, that haunting certainty that she wasn't alone in the cabin. And when she finally lay down, her eyes open in the dark, a voice deep and low seemed to echo from somewhere close. "You're not alone, Emily, not anymore." And she knew then someone or something was watching her. The morning after the whisper, Emily tried to convince herself it had all been a dream. She told herself it was the stress, the loneliness, maybe even the sound of the wind through the cracks in the walls. But deep down she knew it hadn't been just her imagination. The voice that said her name still echoed in her ears, calm, close, and unmistakably human. She decided to leave that day, to drive back to town and spend the rest of her weekend somewhere less isolated. But when she went outside, her car keys were missing. She searched her bag, her coat, even the snow by the steps, but they were gone. Panic started to rise in her chest. She tried calling Daniel, but there was no service. The woods surrounded her, quiet and still, like they were holding their breath. Then, through the trees, she saw movement. Jack carrying a pile of chopped wood toward her cabin. Relief washed over her. She waved and called out, "Jack, wait." He stopped and smiled as she approached. "Morning. You look like you've seen a ghost." She hesitated before saying, "My keys are gone. I can't find them anywhere." "I was thinking of leaving early," but he frowned, setting down the wood. "That's strange. Maybe you dropped them near the trail yesterday. I can help you look." They spent an hour searching, but the keys never turned up. Jack offered to drive her into town after lunch to get a spare made. She reluctantly agreed. Inside the cabin, he helped her light the fire again. And they talked while the snow started falling outside. It felt strangely comforting having someone there. His voice was warm, calm, and steady. She found herself relaxing, laughing even, which surprised her at one point. She said softly, "You make this place feel less lonely." Jack looked at her for a long moment before replying, "Maybe you needed someone to remind you that you're still worth being around." The words caught her off guard. She turned away, hiding a small smile. It had been a long time since anyone said something kind like that to her. After lunch, they set out for his truck, parked a short walk away through the trees. The snow had thickened into a steady fall, muffling every sound. As they walked, Emily noticed something odd. A second cabin, half hidden by branches. Its windows were dark, the roof sagging slightly. "Who lives there?" she asked. Jack's expression changed. "No one," he said quickly. "It's been empty for years." But as they passed, Emily felt eyes on her again, the same heavy awareness she'd felt the night before. She turned her head, and for a brief second, she saw a shadow move behind the cracked window. Jack caught her staring and said firmly, "Don't go near that place. It's not safe." They reached the truck, but when he turned the key, the engine sputtered and died. He cursed under his breath, trying again and again, but it wouldn't start. "Battery's dead," he said. "Looks like we're stuck here until tomorrow." Emily's heart sank. The snow was falling harder now, and daylight was fading fast. "So, what do we do?" "I'll stay nearby tonight," Jack said, "just to make sure you're safe. This storm can get bad." Something in his tone was protective, almost tender. Despite the fear that still lingered, she nodded. "All right, thank you." That night, the wind howled outside, shaking the windows. The power flickered but stayed on. Emily sat near the fireplace, wrapped in a blanket, while Jack sat across from her, quietly carving a piece of wood with a small knife. The rhythm of his movements was calming. "You really live out here all alone?" she asked. He nodded. "After my divorce, I couldn't stand the city. Too much noise, too many people pretending they're happy." Emily smiled faintly. "That sounds familiar." He looked up. "Your husband." She hesitated, then sighed. "We don't fight. We just stopped caring, I guess. It's like living beside a stranger." Jack's gaze softened. "You deserve more than that. Everyone does." For a long time, neither of them spoke. The fire crackled and the snow kept falling. Emily found herself studying his face, the lines around his eyes, the quiet sadness in them. He looked like someone who had loved deeply and lost even deeper. Eventually, she grew tired and said she was going to sleep. Jack offered to stay on the couch, and she thanked him. She went into the small bedroom, closed the door halfway, and lay down. But sleep didn't come easily. The whisper from the night before haunted her. She turned over again and again until finally, exhaustion pulled her under. She didn't know how long she'd been asleep when she woke suddenly. The firelight from the main room glowed faintly through the half-open door. She heard movement, slow, careful footsteps. Her body tensed. The floor creaked just outside the bedroom. She turned her head and froze. Someone was standing in the doorway. For a moment, she thought it was Jack. But something about the silhouette was wrong. Taller, heavier. She opened her mouth to speak. But the figure moved away before she could say a word. Heart pounding, she got out of bed, grabbed the flashlight, and walked into the main room. Jack was asleep on the couch, his hand still resting on the carved piece of wood. The front door was locked. Everything seemed untouched. She stood there, trembling, staring at him. If Jack was there, then who had been at her door? The next morning, she told him what she saw. His reaction was strange calm to calm to calm. "You've been through a lot. Your mind might be playing tricks," he said. "This cabin can do that to people." She wanted to believe him, but doubt crept in. Later, while he went outside to check the truck again, she walked around the cabin searching for any sign of what she'd seen. And that's when she found it, a footprint larger than Jack's, pressed deep in the snow right outside her window. Her pulse raced. Someone had been there when Jack came back. She showed him the footprint. His face darkened, and for the first time, she saw fear in his eyes. "We should go to my place," he said quickly. "You'll be safer there." They packed what little she had and started toward his cabin. The wind was sharp, biting at their faces, and the snow made it hard to see. When they finally reached his home, Emily was surprised. It was warm, clean, and surprisingly organized, like someone had built it to last forever. As she looked around, she noticed something that made her pause. On the wall above the fireplace hung a photo Jack with a woman who looked eerily like her. Same hair color, same smile. She stepped closer. "Who is she?" she asked. Jack hesitated. "My wife," he said softly. "She's gone now." There was something in his voice, regret, pain, and something else she couldn't name. Emily didn't ask more, but the resemblance stayed in her mind like a shadow. That night, she lay on the couch, staring at the ceiling. The storm outside had turned violent, shaking the cabin. Jack was in the next room, but she couldn't sleep. Around midnight, she heard a sound faint, like whispering. At first, she thought it was the wind. But then she realized it was coming from outside. She got up and looked through the window. The storm had slowed, and through the snow, she saw something moving near the tree line, a flicker of light, a lantern swaying back and forth. She turned toward Jack's room. "Jack," she called softly. No answer. The whisper grew louder. She pressed her hand against the cold glass. Then she saw him, a man standing in the snow, holding the lantern, looking directly at her. Her blood ran cold. It wasn't Jack. She blinked, and the light vanished. Emily stumbled back, her heart pounding. She ran to Jack's door and knocked. "Jack, there's someone outside." He opened it almost instantly, already dressed, as if he'd been awake. His face was pale. "Stay here," he said firmly, grabbing his coat. "No, don't go out there." She protested, but he was already outside, disappearing into the storm. Minutes passed. Then 10, then 20. No sign of him. The cabin creaked in the wind. Emily stood by the fire, every muscle tense, waiting for the door to open. Finally, it did, and Jack stepped inside, covered in snow, his face unreadable. "Did you find anyone?" she asked. He paused, looking straight at her. "No," he said quietly. "No one's out there," but something in his eyes said otherwise. He was hiding something. She didn't press him. But as she turned to go back to bed, she noticed something strange on his sleeve. Smeared faintly against the snow was a dark red stain. And before she could say a word, Jack said softly, "You should get some rest. Emily, tomorrow everything will make sense." But deep down, she knew nothing about this place made sense anymore. And as she lay awake that night, she realized the one person she trusted might not be who she thought he was. Emily barely slept that night. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw that red stain on Jack's sleeve. The storm outside had eased, but the silence that followed felt heavier than the wind ever had. Morning light crept through the frosted window, dim and cold. Jack was already up, sitting by the fire, staring into the flames like he was lost somewhere far away. "Did you sleep?" he asked without turning. "Not really," she admitted. Her voice was shaky. "Are you sure no one was out there last night?" Jack hesitated. "I didn't find anyone," he said finally. "But you're safe here, Emily. That's all that matters." His calmness should have reassured her, but it didn't. There was something guarded about the way he spoke now. something hidden. She couldn't forget the photo of his wife, the one who looked so much like her, or the way his eyes seemed haunted when she asked about her. After breakfast, Emily decided she needed to find her car keys. She couldn't stay here any longer. When Jack stepped out to fetch more wood, she quietly searched his cabin. She checked drawers, shelves, even under furniture. Nothing. Then, behind the books on a low shelf, she found a small wooden box. Inside were a few old photos, yellowed with age. One was of Jack and his wife standing right outside this same cabin, smiling. But another photo made her blood run cold. It was of her standing by her own car, taken from a distance. She recognized her coat the day she'd arrived. Her hands shook as she heard footsteps returning. She quickly put the box back and stepped away. Jack entered, brushing snow from his jacket, and smiled faintly. "Everything okay?" She nodded too quickly. "Just tired." He studied her for a moment, like he could sense something was off. Then he said gently, "You don't have to be afraid of me, Emily." Not. She lied, but she was. Later that afternoon, while he went out to check on the generator, she took the chance to slip out. The snow had melted enough to make the road visible again. She followed it, hoping to reach the main road before dark. Her heart pounded with every step. The forest was eerily quiet. No birds, no wind. Only the sound of her boots crunching against the icy ground. After nearly an hour, she stopped to rest near a fallen tree. That's when she heard footsteps behind her, slow, measured. She turned around and her breath caught. Jack was standing a few yards away, his expression unreadable. "You shouldn't wander off like that," he said calmly. "These woods can be dangerous." "I just needed some air." She stammered. He took a step closer. "You were trying to leave." There was no anger in his voice, only disappointment, which somehow felt worse. Emily's throat tightened. "I thought you wanted me to be safe." "I do," he said softly. "But out there, you're not safe. You don't understand what's happening." Her heart raced. "Then tell me, what is happening?" Jack looked around as if the trees themselves were listening. Then he said quietly, "You remember the voice you heard your first night here? The one that said your name?" She nodded, barely breathing. "It wasn't your imagination," he continued. "And it wasn't me." Emily froze. "Then who was it?" Jack's jaw tightened. "My wife died in this forest 3 years ago. But sometimes I think she never really left." The world seemed to tilt beneath her feet. "Jack, that doesn't make sense." "I didn't believe it at first either," he said. "But I've seen her. I've heard her. She doesn't want anyone else here. She thinks they're replacing her." Emily stepped back. "Jack, stop. You're scaring me." He raised his hands gently. "I'm trying to protect you. You looked so much like her when you showed up. I thought maybe it was a sign. Maybe I could make things right this time." Emily shook her head. "I have to go." Before he could respond, she turned and ran. Branches whipped at her arms, snow crunched beneath her boots, and her breath came out in clouds. She didn't look back until she reached the edge of the clearing end. That's when she saw it. The second cabin. The one Jack told her never to go near. Its door was slightly open now, creaking in the wind. Something about it drew her closer, despite the fear clawing at her chest. Inside, the air was cold and damp. Dust coated the furniture. On the wall, she saw faint handprints, like someone had touched it recently. And then, on a small table near the window, she found something that made her blood run cold. Her car keys before she could grab them. A soft whisper filled the room. "Emily." She spun around. No one was there. The voice came again, closer this time, right behind her ear. "He shouldn't have brought you here." She stumbled back, terrified, and ran out of the cabin. Snowflakes stung her face as she sprinted toward the road, but standing there, blocking her path, was Jack. "Emily." He called, reaching out. "Wait, stay away from me." She screamed, holding the keys in her shaking hand. "I found them. I'm leaving." His face crumpled with sorrow. "You don't understand. She won't let you go. Don't believe you." She cried and ran past him. He didn't chase her. He just watched, his expression hollow, as she disappeared down the trail. By some miracle, Emily made it to her car. It was half buried in snow, but it started on the first try. Her hands trembled as she gripped the steering wheel and sped away, not daring to look back. The forest seemed endless, the road winding like it never wanted her to leave. Finally, she reached the highway. Relief hit her so hard she started crying. She didn't stop driving until she saw the lights of a small diner on the outskirts of town. Inside, the warmth and chatter felt unreal after the silence of the woods. The waitress brought her coffee, and Emily sat there for a long time trying to calm her shaking hands. She told herself she was safe now. It was over. But when she looked out the window toward the parking lot, her heart stopped. Jack's truck was parked across the street. He was standing beside it. Staring straight at her. She froze, unable to breathe. For a second, she thought about running, but then, as a car passed by and its headlights swept over the spot, he was gone. The truck was gone. Emily left town the next morning. She never went back to that cabin. She tried to forget, but the memory stayed, his voice, the whisper, the shadow by her bed. Months later, she was unpacking boxes in her new apartment when she found something strange inside her suitcase. A small wooden carving, a heart, smooth and unfinished. The same one Jack had been carving by the fire. Taped to it was a note in neat handwriting. "I'm glad you made it out, but she's still watching." Emily dropped it, her hands shaking. She stared at the carving for a long time before putting it away in a drawer she never opened again. Sometimes, at night, when she couldn't sleep, she'd hear something faint whisper from the dark corner of her room. It always said the same thing, "Emily." And that's when she'd remember the cabin. Snow. The man who watched her sleep. But the part that haunted her most wasn't the fear. It was the way he'd looked at her, like she was the ghost, not him. And deep down, she sometimes wondered if maybe, just maybe, the whisper was right. Maybe she hadn't left that cabin at all. Clara had always considered herself a quiet woman. Her apartment on the third floor of a modest city building was her sanctuary, a place where she could retreat from the noise and chaos of life. She enjoyed the little routines, brewing her morning coffee, reading a book by the window, listening to the distant hum of the city below. It was peaceful, predictable, and safe. But recently, that sense of safety had begun to shift. A presence had emerged in her life that she hadn't anticipated, and it stirred feelings she didn't fully understand. Her neighbor, Daniel, lived in the apartment next door. They had known each other in passing for some time. Polite nods in the hallway, brief chats about the weather, and the occasional borrowed sugar or salt. Daniel had a girlfriend, Sophie, who visited on weekends, and together they seemed like the picture of a happy young couple. From her apartment, Clara could sometimes hear their laughter drifting through the walls. And it was the kind of warmth she could almost feel but never touch. One rainy Tuesday evening, there was a soft knock at her door. Clara, wrapped in her oversized sweater, opened it to find Daniel standing there, slightly damp from the rain. He held an envelope in one hand, looking hesitant, almost vulnerable. "Hi, Clara," he said softly. I think this came by mistake. Could it be yours?" His eyes were anxious, and she noticed a tension in his shoulders that made her heart soften. "Of course," she replied, stepping aside to let him in. He shook off his coat, and she could see the worry etched lightly on his face. They sat in the living room, the rain pattering against the windows, and they began talking. At first it was small talk, the envelope, the weather, her work. Clara was a graphic designer, often lost in her designs and client deadlines, while Daniel worked in real estate, a career that demanded patience and charm. But as the conversation unfolded, it quickly became more than polite chatter. He spoke about the small stresses of his life, about projects that had gone wrong and opportunities that had slipped by. Clara listened intently, offering encouragement, suggestions, and the occasional smile. Daniel's voice had a calm sincerity, a tone that made her feel important, heard, and understood. It was rare, she realized, to meet someone who truly listened without interruption. Without the pretense of judgment, the evening stretched longer than either of them expected. They spoke about childhood memories, favorite books, and the oddities of city life. Clara found herself laughing more freely than she had in weeks. Daniel had a gentle humor, the kind that didn't demand attention but quietly drew you in. She noticed how his eyes lit up when he talked about his passions, how his hands moved slightly when he emphasized a point. The connection was subtle, almost imperceptible to anyone else but to Clara. It felt meaningful. As the rain continued to fall, the conversation shifted. Daniel mentioned Sophie casually, speaking of her with affection, but also with a quiet honesty that suggested complexity in their relationship. Clara nodded, understanding that no relationship was without its challenges. Daniel didn't overshare or complain. He simply spoke truthfully about his feelings, about the moments when life felt heavy and he needed someone to lean on. Clara felt a flutter in her chest, an emotional response she hadn't anticipated. She realized that she was not just listening to a neighbor. She was connecting with someone who had become unexpectedly important in her life. There was a warmth in the room, a shared space of comfort and trust. She could feel herself opening in ways she hadn't in years. She found herself leaning slightly forward when he spoke, absorbing every word, cherishing the quiet intimacy that had grown between them in a single evening. Daniel, for his part, seemed equally affected. There were pauses in the conversation, moments where he looked at her with a sincerity that suggested he felt a bond too. He wasn't touching her, he wasn't crossing boundaries, but the unspoken understanding between them was tangible. He trusted her. He felt safe in her presence. And in that room with the rain outside and the soft glow of the lamp, Clara felt the same way. Eventually, the evening came to a close. Daniel stood, hesitated, and then spoke softly. "Thank you, Clara," he said, his voice tinged with something deeper than gratitude. "I don't know why, but I feel lighter after talking to you. It's rare for me to feel this way with anyone." Clara smiled, a mixture of warmth and surprise at the depth of their exchange. "I'm glad you feel comfortable," she said. "It's nice to talk to someone who understands." He lingered for a moment at the door, their eyes meeting in a quiet acknowledgement of what had passed between them. Then he stepped into the rain, waved briefly, and disappeared down the hall. Clara closed the door and leaned against it, breathing slowly. Her heart was still racing, her mind swirling with thoughts she hadn't expected to confront. Who was this connection she felt? And why did it feel so significant, so immediate, and so complicated? That night, sleep was elusive. Clara lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying the evening in her mind. She thought about Daniel's eyes, the gentleness of his voice, the way he had listened so attentively. She realized that she had not felt this alive, this seen, in years. The emotional intimacy they had shared was intoxicating in its simplicity. It wasn't physical, it wasn't romantic in the traditional sense. But it was deeply moving. Over the next few days, she noticed subtle changes in herself. Her thoughts drifted toward him unexpectedly. She found herself smiling at the memory of his laugh, the way he tilted his head when he was thinking. Even mundane tasks felt lighter when she imagined him, like a silent companion who understood her in a way no one else did. Daniel's visits became more frequent, always seemingly innocent, always needing her insight or advice. Sometimes it was a question about a minor home repair, sometimes a discussion about a new book he was reading. Each time the room seemed to shrink around them, the world outside fading, leaving just the two of them and the warmth they created in each other's presence. Clara began to realize that emotional intimacy could be powerful, even overwhelming. She found herself anticipating his visits, feeling a flutter of nervous excitement whenever he knocked. It wasn't infatuation in the shallow sense, but something deeper, a connection of hearts, of trust, of quiet understanding. She also began to recognize the tension it created within her. Daniel had Sophie, and Clara had her own sense of ethics and personal boundaries. But the heart did not always follow rules. And while she was careful not to overstep, she could not deny the pull she felt toward him, the yearning for the companionship and understanding he provided by the end of the week. Clara understood that her life had shifted. She had opened her door to a neighbor, to a friend, to someone who had unexpectedly become essential to her emotional well-being. And she knew, without knowing exactly how, that the coming weeks would test her understanding of connection, boundaries, and the quiet, complex pull of human hearts. The rain had stopped, leaving the city glistening and quiet, and Clara stood by the window, reflecting. She realized that life was rarely simple, rarely predictable. Sometimes it brought unexpected people, moments of connection that changed everything in subtle, profound ways. And as she looked down the hall at Daniel's apartment, she felt anticipation, curiosity, and a touch of fear about what the next evening would bring, knowing in her heart that her life had quietly begun to change. After that first rainy evening, Daniel's visits became more frequent. Clara found herself anticipating the soft knock on her door almost as much as the morning coffee she cherished. Each time he arrived, she felt a mixture of excitement and caution. She reminded herself constantly that Daniel had Sophie and that she had to respect boundaries. But the emotional pull was undeniable. It started innocently, with small conversations about everyday matters. Daniel would stop by to borrow a pen, discuss a new book, or share a funny story from his work. Yet, over time, the small gestures became layered with meaning. His eyes would linger just a little longer. His voice would soften when speaking directly to her. And the pauses between their sentences carried a weight that neither had voiced aloud. Clara felt the subtle electricity of understanding and companionship growing between them. One evening, Daniel arrived carrying a takeout bag, his expression unusually contemplative. "I thought maybe we could have dinner together," he said quietly. Clara hesitated, mindful of Sophie, but something about the way he looked, open, honest, and vulnerable, made her nod. They ate together at her small kitchen table, the sound of silverware against plates punctuating their conversation. It wasn't a romantic dinner, not in the traditional sense, but there was a closeness in the shared meal, an intimacy built on presence and attention. They spoke about their dreams that night. Daniel revealed that he had always wanted to travel more, to see the coastlines of California and the mountains of Colorado. Clara shared her own unfulfilled ambitions, a dream of illustrating a children's book, a project she had shelved in the busyness of life. As they talked, laughter and quiet reflections intertwined, creating a rhythm that felt deeply familiar. Clara realized she was no longer simply listening to a neighbor. She was sharing pieces of herself that she rarely offered anyone. Over the following week, their routine settled into something predictable, yet extraordinary. Each evening, Daniel would knock, and Clara would feel a small thrill she couldn't suppress. Their conversations became deeper, exploring subjects that were often left unspoken with others: fears, insecurities, hopes, and past regrets. Daniel spoke candidly about the tension in his relationship with Sophie, not in complaint, but in honest acknowledgement of how life had subtly shifted their bond. Clara listened without judgment, offering understanding and support, and in return, Daniel showed a trust she hadn't encountered in years. It was during one of these nights that Clara first noticed how complicated her feelings had become. Daniel laughed at something trivial she said, and for a moment the world outside seemed to vanish. She saw him as more than a friend, more than a neighbor, someone who understood her on a level that surprised her. She caught herself watching him as he spoke, noticing the subtle gestures, the way his eyes softened when he smiled. The attraction wasn't physical. It was emotional, a deep connection that made her heart ache with longing and appreciation. Daniel seemed aware of the effect he had on her, though he never crossed a line. His visits were always courteous, his words chosen carefully. Yet there was an undercurrent, a recognition of the bond growing between them, quiet but undeniable. Clara found herself thinking about him during the day, smiling at his text messages, replaying their conversations, feeling warmth in her chest she hadn't felt in years. One evening, Daniel arrived looking more serious than usual. He sat on the edge of her couch, hands clasped, and spoke softly. "Clara, I've been thinking a lot about everything," he began. "About Sophie, about us, about how complicated life can be. I don't want to hurt anyone, but I can't ignore how I feel when I'm here with you." Clara's breath caught. She understood the weight of his words, the balance between honesty, loyalty, and the undeniable connection they shared. She remained calm, reminding herself that boundaries mattered. That respect for his relationship was essential. But she also acknowledged the truth in her own heart. "I feel the same way," she admitted quietly. "I care about you and I appreciate every moment we spend talking. But we have to be careful." Daniel nodded, relief and tension mingling in his expression. They spent the rest of the evening talking openly about their emotions. They explored what it meant to care for someone deeply without overstepping boundaries, how companionship could be intimate without being physical, and the subtle ways human hearts could connect even amidst complicated circumstances. As the night wore on, the rain began to fall again, tapping gently against the windows. Clara felt a strange mix of fear and comfort. Fear of the complexities that lay ahead. Comfort in knowing that someone truly saw her, understood her, and shared her thoughts without judgment. Their conversation drifted to memories of childhood and adolescence. Stories of family and friends, and the quiet disappointments life had dealt them. In those moments, the weight of isolation she had carried for so long seemed to lift, replaced by connection, understanding, and shared humanity. The next few days were filled with subtle tension. Clara noticed herself anticipating Daniel's arrival, wondering what he would say, how he would look, and what small nuances in his behavior would reveal his inner thoughts. She found herself smiling more freely, laughing at his jokes, and even feeling a lightness in her steps as she moved through her apartment. The emotional intimacy they shared was like a warm current running beneath the surface of everyday life, unseen by the world but profoundly affecting her. Daniel, too, seemed changed. He carried a quiet energy into their conversations, a willingness to explore emotions that he had rarely expressed with others. He spoke about life's uncertainties, dreams unfulfilled, and the subtle beauty of small, shared moments. Clara realized that she was witnessing not only his vulnerability, but also his growth. Their connection wasn't reckless or inappropriate. It was mutual support, a deepening friendship that both challenged and comforted them. One evening, Daniel arrived later than usual. The building was silent, the city lights casting a gentle glow through Clara's windows. He appeared weary, his usual charm tempered by fatigue. "It's been a long day," he admitted, sitting heavily on her couch. Clara handed him a cup of tea, and they sat in comfortable silence, the warmth of the liquid in their hands mirroring the warmth between them. They spoke sparingly at first, then slowly opened up, sharing small confessions and unspoken fears. Daniel admitted that he had begun to question his relationship with Sophie. Not out of dissatisfaction, but out of recognition that feelings could shift over time. Clara listened without judgment, offering understanding and perspective. In turn, she shared moments of loneliness she had long kept hidden. The quiet struggles of living a life that often felt disconnected from others. By the end of the evening, a sense of calm had settled over them. They had not crossed any lines. They had not breached trust or ethical boundaries. Yet the emotional bond had strengthened. Clara felt a new depth in her connection to Daniel, one that transcended mere friendship. She realized that intimacy was not always physical. Sometimes it was the simple act of being present, listening, and caring in a way that allowed another person to feel truly seen. The days that followed brought a new rhythm. Daniel continued to visit, their conversations deepening, exploring topics that ranged from mundane daily routines to profound life reflections. Clara found herself reflecting on her own desires, her own boundaries, and the ways in which human connection could enrich life without causing harm. She discovered that emotional closeness could be transformative, that trust and understanding could foster a sense of belonging she had longed for but rarely found. Yet, amid the comfort, there was tension. Clara recognized the fragility of the situation. Daniel had Sophie, a relationship that mattered to him, and she had her own sense of ethics. They navigated these moments carefully, aware of the delicate balance between emotional support and moral responsibility. Each conversation, each shared moment was imbued with awareness, mindfulness, and an unspoken commitment to honesty. By the end of the second week, Clara and Daniel had formed an unspoken pact. Their connection was real, meaningful and emotionally charged, yet restrained. They were allies in a world that often felt isolating, offering each other companionship, understanding, and trust. It was a bond that neither could have predicted, but both had come to rely upon. That night, as Clara prepared for bed, she reflected on the transformation she had undergone. The quiet evenings with Daniel had awakened feelings of anticipation, empathy, and emotional intimacy she had long thought dormant. She understood that life often presented unexpected connections, relationships that were profound not because of physical intimacy, but because of the shared understanding of hearts and minds. And as she drifted into sleep, the memory of Daniel's laughter, his thoughtful eyes, and the gentle warmth of his presence lingered, a reminder that human connection, in all its forms, could be a source of comfort, growth, and even quiet joy, even when boundaries were respected and lines carefully maintained. Clara woke up that morning with a strange mix of anticipation and unease. Daniel hadn't come by the previous evening, and she felt the absence of his presence in her apartment like a missing piece of a puzzle. The quiet of her space seemed heavier, and she realized how much those conversations had come to mean to her. She spent the morning moving through her routines, yet her thoughts kept drifting toward him, to the warmth of his smile, the sincerity in his voice, and the feeling that he truly understood her in a way few ever had. Later that afternoon, there was a knock at her door. Her heart skipped a beat, and she hurried to answer, half hoping it would be Daniel and half dreading the weight of unspoken emotions. When she opened the door, there he was, slightly out of breath, holding a small package. "Hey," he said, a soft smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. "I thought you might like this." It was a book, one she had casually mentioned weeks ago, a story she had wanted to read but never had the time. The gesture was small, thoughtful, and deeply personal. Clara felt a warmth spread through her chest. She invited him in, and they sat together on the couch, unwrapping the package and flipping through the pages, discussing the cover, the plot, and the characters. The room felt cozy, intimate, yet perfectly safe, a sanctuary for connection without crossing boundaries. As the afternoon unfolded, their conversation took a more reflective turn. Daniel spoke about his relationship with Sophie, about the complexities of love, loyalty, and personal growth. Clara listened, understanding that life was rarely simple, that relationships could be messy, and that emotional connections could appear in unexpected places. She realized that her bond with Daniel was not a betrayal. It was a friendship, an emotional refuge, and a source of understanding that enriched both their lives. Daniel, for his part, seemed equally aware of the delicate balance between closeness and boundaries. He shared stories of his childhood, moments of vulnerability, and times when he had felt alone despite being surrounded by people. Clara responded with her own reflections, revealing fears, hopes, and small dreams she had tucked away for years. In those moments, the world outside ceased to matter. The city hummed faintly through the windows, but inside there was only the shared presence, the unspoken acknowledgement of understanding and trust as evening approached. The light outside shifted to a warm golden hue, and Clara realized that she had not felt this alive in a long time. The conversations with Daniel were not only comforting, but transformative. They allowed her to explore her emotions, confront her own desires for connection, and acknowledge the power of emotional intimacy. She understood now that love, attraction, and attachment could manifest in many ways, not all of which were physical or conventional. Their talks began to include laughter, gentle teasing, and playful challenges. Daniel had a way of noticing small details about her, the way she sipped her tea, how she tilted her head when she thought, the quiet smile that appeared when she was pleased. Clara, in turn, noticed the care he put into small gestures, the way he would pause to truly listen, the thoughtfulness in his comments, the subtle ways he made her feel seen. It was a connection grounded in respect and mutual awareness, a bond that deepened with every shared story and quiet moment. One evening, as rain began to tap against the windows once more, Daniel shared something personal. "Clara," he said quietly, "I've been thinking a lot about how people come into our lives. Some connections are fleeting, but some change us in ways we can't ignore. I feel that with you." Clara's heart quickened. She understood exactly what he meant. This connection was transformative, a reminder that human bonds could be powerful without needing to cross moral or physical lines. Clara responded with honesty. "I feel it too," she admitted softly, "and I cherish it. But we have to navigate it carefully. It matters to me that we respect the people in our lives while still valuing this connection." Daniel nodded, and for a moment, silence spoke louder than words. They simply sat together, acknowledging the depth of what they shared without needing to define it further. Over the next few days, Clara noticed subtle changes in herself. She carried a lighter energy, a renewed sense of purpose, and a deeper understanding of her own emotions. The anticipation of Daniel's visits was no longer fraught with confusion or guilt. Instead, it was a source of joy, a reminder that meaningful connections could exist in ways that honored everyone involved. She began to notice small moments in her day more vividly, the way sunlight fell through her window, the distant laughter of children playing outside, the quiet hum of the city. Everything seemed richer, more vibrant, because her heart had been touched in ways that mattered. Daniel's presence became a steady rhythm in her life. They would meet in the evenings, discuss books, movies, and life, or simply sit together in comfortable silence. They shared small victories, frustrations, and dreams. Clara found herself confiding in him more openly than she had with anyone in years, and Daniel reciprocated, revealing layers of his personality that few had seen. In those moments, they were equals to people navigating life, understanding one another, and finding solace in shared experience. One night, Daniel arrived unusually quiet. He sat on the couch, hands clasped, and took a deep breath. "Clara," he said, "I think this connection we have, it's more important than either of us realized. It's taught me so much about myself, about care, respect, and understanding. I don't know what the future holds, but I know that this has changed me." Clara reached out and touched his hand lightly, a gesture of empathy, trust, and connection. "It has changed me too," she replied, "and I'm grateful. We've learned so much from each other." As the conversation deepened, they discussed boundaries, ethical responsibility, and the ways they could nurture their bond without causing harm. They acknowledged that life was rarely straightforward, that relationships were complex, and that emotional intimacy could exist independently of romantic or physical attraction. In embracing this understanding, they found freedom, the freedom to care deeply, to connect meaningfully, and to grow as individuals without compromising values. The days turned into weeks, and the rhythm of their companionship solidified. Clara began to see Daniel not just as a neighbor, but as a confidant, a mentor in understanding human emotions and a mirror reflecting her own growth. Daniel, in turn, found in Clara a partner in conversation, a steady presence in his otherwise turbulent life, and a reminder that meaningful relationships could take many forms. Clara noticed that her perception of life had shifted. The world no longer felt lonely or isolating. She had learned to recognize and appreciate emotional intimacy, to honor the subtle power of connection without needing it to conform to societal expectations of romance or passion. She began applying this understanding to other relationships as well, noticing how listening, empathy, and presence could transform ordinary interactions into meaningful bonds. One evening, as autumn leaves swirled outside, Daniel and Clara shared a long conversation on her balcony. They spoke about dreams, hopes, and fears, laughter mingling with quiet reflection. Daniel admitted that he had never experienced a connection quite like this before, one that was simultaneously freeing and grounding. Clara agreed, acknowledging that life often offered unexpected gifts, and it was up to individuals to recognize and nurture them responsibly. By the time the night ended, Clara felt a deep sense of peace. She realized that the bond they shared was enduring not because it was romantic or physical, but because it was authentic, ethical, and mutually enriching. Daniel's presence in her life had taught her about the importance of honesty, trust, empathy, and emotional courage. And in those lessons, she had found joy, fulfillment, and a profound understanding of herself and her capacity to connect. At the final days of their story together unfolded with a quiet grace. Daniel continued his visits, each interaction marked by trust, warmth, and emotional clarity. They discussed the ordinary and the extraordinary, comforted each other through challenges, and celebrated small victories together. Their connection had become a sanctuary, space where both could be fully themselves without fear, judgment, or compromise of values. Clara knew that life would continue to present challenges and changes. But she also understood that meaningful connections, when nurtured responsibly, could transform the way one approached relationships, emotions, and personal growth. Daniel had come into her life unexpectedly, not to disrupt, but to illuminate. And in that illumination, Clara discovered a depth of understanding, compassion, and emotional richness she had never known as she watched him leave that final evening. The city lights reflecting off the wet streets, Clara felt a quiet gratitude. Their bond had not required violation of boundaries or ethical compromise. It had been built on conversation, presence, trust, and mutual respect. And in that, she found a lasting lesson that human connection in its purest form could be both transformative and safe, powerful and gentle, emotional and entirely wholesome.